The ESG green side of the merge of what's happening today is definitely the part that like mainstream media and crypto outsiders are latching on to.
Yeah.
It seems to be like, oh yes, Ethereum, the merge, that's where Ethereum becomes green, right? That's where we stop consuming carbon and we start being like this tech forward green system. And that's not really the way that crypto insiders interpret what's happening today. The crypto, if you're inside of the industry, you are really focused on Ether and the economics behind the monetary policy of Ethereum and like the reduction of issuance. That seems to be what you're focused on the inside of things. Not to discredit the significance of, you know, doing a 99.95 reduction of energy consumption. That's certainly a big deal, but that's just the part of the story that the outside world can understand, right? Like it's easier to understand like, hey, that proof of work thing, Bitcoin mining, like Ethereum is no longer doing that. It's doing this other thing called proof of stake. That's easy to understand. And it is one of the big ways to like defang some of the crypto haters out there. It's like, oh, NFTs, they're pump and dump scams and they consume a lot of energy. The crypto industry is being removed, at least from the Ethereum side of things. And so this is just like one big move, one big step forward over a very long phase of like slowly winning the hearts and minds of the outside world. And that is simply producing protocols that align with social values of society these days. And so people can feel a little bit better by adopting Ethereum as a platform now that we don't have to have this like massive energy consumption. There's two angles here to discuss. Previous changes to Ethereum's monetary policy has always been this manual, arbitrary set of changes. And that was always with the Ether rewards per block that was mined. So when Ethereum was started, there would be 5 Ether issued per block. Then that was reduced to 3. Then that was reduced to 2. And these were all like arbitrary, like top-down decisions, just that like they were good decisions, but they aren't really what we look for when we look at a financial system that is controlled by code. We want mechanisms that produce a monetary policy that is, you know, algorithmic. And the first introduction of that was EIP 1559, where, you know, there would be some sort of burning as a function of the market demand to consume Ethereum block space. As Ethereum becomes more used, that would increase the interest rates, if you will, of what it takes to consume block space on the Ethereum network, right? And so this is this very like market-derived phenomenon, and this transition towards proof of stake is like kind of the other half of that piece of the puzzle. So now we have both the issuance of Ether, the consumption of Ether, just everything about Ethereum's monetary policy becomes algorithmic rather than like human controlled. And we have these systems that are like naturally equilibrium discovering systems for Ethereum's monetary policy. And that just feels very crypto economic. It feels very sci-fi. And it's one of the things that brought me into the crypto space in the first place. So that's the first side of the equation, is like our economic policies just very like crypto. It's very crypto native. And then the other half of that equation is the fundamental nature of what proof of stake is in comparison to proof of work, where proof of work miners are always in this race to consume as much electricity as possible. That's like kind of how proof of work mining works. In theory, it's a race to sell Bitcoins, right? Like if you are a proof of work miner, you need to consume more electricity, you need to produce more hash power, you need to have higher operational expenses. And what that logically concludes to is a higher and higher proportion of mining rewards being sold to reinvest in the business, right? Because if you are a mining company, you need to produce more hashes at a cheaper rate than your competitors to stay in the business. And what this naturally concludes to is miners selling up to like, it approaches 99% of all rewards get sold. And so we have this consensus mechanism called proof of work that is really this tax on the system, because the security providers have to sell all of their inflows in order to maintain their business, because their business is about having high operational overhead, about competing on energy consumption. And so it approaches 100% of net sell pressure for all proof of work mining rewards. And so proof of stake flips this and makes this inverted, where proof of stake is like, well, not only do we issue the minimum amount of Ether needed to secure the network, you also are competing as Ether stakers as to who is going to hold that Ether the most. And so as more and more ETH stakers come and stake their ETH, the yields that ETH stakers are paid actually comes down, because there are more stakers that are receiving more of the issuance. And so it turns into like this game of chicken of like, oh, you're so bullish that you're going to stake ETH at 4%. well, I'll stake ETH at 3%. And somebody else comes and says like, well, I'll stake ETH down to 2.5%. I'm still not selling my Ether. And so rather than a competition to sell as much Bitcoin as possible, proof of stake is a competition for like who's more bullish and who's willing to not sell Ether at lower and lower yields. So instead of having a 100% like sell rate, it goes into a 100% hold rate. And so this naturally creates like a scarcity mentality in Ether, the asset. And it's just fundamentally bullish when like your security mechanism doesn't force selling and instead of incentivizes holding and rewards holders. That is where we actually get this true decoupling from the Bitcoin price action from the Ether price action. In bull markets, miners make an insane amount of revenue. And so bull markets really have this timer on them because miners have infinite sell pressure. And so we haven't really had this like prolonged sustainable bull market, super cycle, whatever you want to call it, because miners can always outsell the new money that comes into the space. And so when we get proof of stake, we can kill that part of like this market cycle where miners always end the fun because they have more coins to sell than we have cash to buy with. And so that is like a fundamentally like bullish catalyst, not just for Ether, but for the industry at large, if Ethereum becomes to underpin more and more and more of it. As soon as we get to the merge, you know, what are we at right now? We're about 12 hours away. I mean, you just go back to the fundamentals I was just talking about. Like Bitcoin has 100% net sell pressure on its security mechanism, and Ethereum has 100% net buy pressure on its security mechanism. And so like eventually like Ethereum's not going to flip Bitcoin 1 month after or 2 months after or 3 months after, but like every further week that Ethereum goes by where miners are selling Bitcoin and Ethereum stakers are hoarding Ether, like there's a timeline on like the flippening. And so I don't know when it is, but it's almost an inevitability. Barring some like catastrophic black swan that we can't really account for, it's like built into the protocol. Ether as a consensus mechanism, as a security mechanism, it's more efficient, it's just stronger, there's more scarcity. And so it's destiny because of the actual raw fundamentals. This isn't some sort of like manifest destiny of like, I believe Ethereum is better. Like it's built into the fundamentals. It's built into the protocol. If we compare this to proof of work, like you have to be wealthy. You have to be massively capitalized in order to have a proof of work mining operation. Like you can't mine at home. You have to have significant capital investment. And so like really it's not comparable how democratize the access is to proof of stake mechanisms versus proof of work mechanisms in terms of like fairness and equity. But there's even more like democratized things like than Rocket Pool. There's like Obel Network where like you and 4 or 5, 6 buddies can group up your computers
together.
Exactly. Group together and stake together. But how if the broader question is like how to profit from the merge, like how do you trade the merge? Is that like the more broad question that we're really going for here? When staked ETH depegs from like maybe one staked ETH from Lido is worth 0.97 Ether, and so you can pocket that like 0.03 arbitrage. That'll take a really long time. I'm not sure that's the best way to do it. There's of course the conversations around like the ETH POW chain, and so like can you get some extra Ether from the POW chain, and we can talk about that. The way that I'm doing it is a long ETH, short BTC trade. And so you can just imagine putting Ether into one side of Aave compound, depositing Ether, borrowing wrapped Bitcoin, and then selling that Bitcoin for Ether. Now, this is not a short-term thing. This is not something that I plan on like settling in a week or a month. This is a long-term trade. Going back to what I was saying, where proof of work is 100%, a theoretical 100% net sell pressure. It's not actually that in practice. It's something more like 90%, but like the pattern is there. If you believe that, you know, this net sell pressure of proof of work compared to this net buy pressure of proof of stake is going to be the thing that diverges the Ether and the Bitcoin price, you can take your Ether and you can make that trade.